How much evidence is enough to believe Christianity? Some will say there's absolutely no evidence, and others will say the evidence is so good that there's no reason to believe anything else. But listen, both of those approaches are too simplistic because there's some evidence for every worldview, and it takes time for us to sort it out. But even when we try, it feels like there's this gap between us and being absolutely certain about our beliefs. When I asked all of you, does believing in Christianity require a leap of faith? 79% of respondents said yes. But I'm not cool with just having blind faith, and I suspect you feel the same way. So listen, I've had my doubts about Christianity, and if you have too, then I think we should ask ourselves, how much evidence is enough to believe? There are lots of ways that we could come at this question, but in 1 Corinthians 15, the Apostle Paul actually gives us a test for the truthfulness of Christianity, the resurrection of Jesus. He says, if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. But if Jesus did rise again, then our trust is well placed. And I think intuitively that's a pretty fair test because I'd be willing to listen carefully to anyone who rose from the dead. What I like about this test is that it isn't just some internal sense of knowing it's true, because I would second guess that forever. Instead, we're investigating a historical fact within history. And to be fair, we should apply the same historical method we would to any historical question. What I don't like about this test is that I'm not a historian, so I don't know what historical method we should use to investigate this claim. So I called up Dr. Licona, who's a New Testament scholar and an expert on the resurrection, in order to ask him about the evidence.
Evidence is important to me. I didn't want to just take the party line. I did find some scholars writing some things that supported the resurrection of Jesus that I just didn't find persuasive. And I wanted true evidence. In order to recognize my own bias as well as the bias of others, I only want those facts that are so strongly supported by the data that virtually all scholars are willing to grant that they are facts.
Facts like Jesus' death by crucifixion, Jesus' disciples believing they saw him risen, groups claiming to have seen him risen, and a skeptic, Paul, saw the risen Jesus and became a dedicated follower. According to Dr. Licona, what a responsible historian would do is look at these facts and then ask what's the best explanation for them. And there are two leading hypotheses, the hallucination theory and the resurrection theory. So let's look at the hallucination hypothesis.
So let's understand first what a hallucination is. A false sensory perception. The people most likely to experience a hallucination are those grieving over the loss of a loved one. Okay, well, that seems to be the disciples at that point. Seems plausible so far. Typically, hallucinations occur in a single mode. People who are schizophrenics or high off drugs or alcohol can experience hallucinations in multiple modes, like they may see and hear something. But other than that, people will only see something but not hear it, or smell something but not feel it. And yet all the reports are that Jesus appeared to them. That's visual. But they also heard him and touched him. He made food for them. He ate in front of them. That doesn't work with the multiple mode. Because hallucinations are false sensory perceptions that are going on in the mind of an individual, groups cannot experience them. In fact, there's a textbook out that came out a few years ago called Hallucinations, the Science of Idiosyncratic Perception, published by the American Psychological Association. I contacted the two co-authors after reading it and said, hey, you guys didn't mention group hallucinations. Why not? They said, we intended to put a whole chapter on it, but we could not find any good documented evidence of a group hallucination. And a third problem with the hallucination hypothesis is Paul. Paul's not grieving over Jesus' death. He believed Jesus was a failed Messiah and a false prophet. So Jesus would have been the last person in the universe that Paul would have expected to see or wanted to see. The hallucination hypothesis just does very little to account for the known minimal facts.
A hallucination theory seems to be an attempt to explain why they saw Jesus alive, but it doesn't explain why there's an empty tomb. They
right.
should be seeing him, but then there should still be a body in the tomb. So it might explain one fact well, but it actually doesn't explain another fact of the narrative.
There is certainly benefit in the academic, the intellectual stuff, because I can look and I can say, you know what? The evidence for the resurrection of Jesus is pretty good. In fact, if there wasn't the miraculous element to it, I think all the historians would accept it.
So I found Dr. Licona quite convincing on this one fact, that between our two leading theories, the one that best explains the agreed upon facts is the resurrection. But this channel is for doubting Christians, and I think doubters might still be asking, is that good enough to believe? And I actually get that. Because even if we grant that the resurrection is the best explanation, that doesn't mean that it's the only logical possibility. I mean, it is logically possible that Jesus was an alien who used advanced technology to convince people he rose from the dead. And I know it sounds silly, but if you want to hear a serious conversation with Dr. Licona on that exact alien point, you should listen to the whole interview. My point is that there actually is a gap between the historical evidence and choosing to trust Jesus as our personal Messiah. And if we look again at 1 Corinthians 15, it actually gives us clues on how we can bridge that gap. Listen, Paul isn't just saying Jesus can do crazy miracles, so listen to him. If that were his only point, then he could have made it just as well with the miracles that Jesus did before his resurrection, like walking on water or healing the blind. Paul is trying to say something deeper, that the resurrection of Jesus unleashed a supernatural power that can spill into our lives. Because Jesus rose from the dead, you can be raised too. You see, if Jesus rose from the dead, we should be able to experience him. It isn't just about authenticating a certain set of beliefs. It can transform our immediate and future experiences. Discussing faith in a way that tries to bring intellect and experience together can be kind of unconventional, because even in church, we're sometimes taught to trust one or the other, but not both. Like experience, it's way too loosey-goosey to be trustworthy. And intellect, I think you meant to say trusting your fallen, corrupted mind. You know what I'm saying? But C.S. Lewis offers a metaphor to help bring these two together. Lewis suggests that theology and doctrine, the intellectual side of faith, is a map. Now, some people get really into maps, but what makes a map valuable is that it reflects a reality that is bigger than itself. And it allows the wisdom and knowledge of others to guide us as we go out to experience what the map reflects. I like to think of it as a treasure map, because you'd be crazy to throw out a treasure map. And of course, you could experience the coastline without a map, but a map will keep you from getting lost. Not to mention, it'll help you discover treasures you wouldn't have. The map and the coastline work together. They're meant to work together. And it's the same with our intellect and experiences, even when it comes to faith. In fact, when our intellect and experiences don't seem to be matching up, that's when we have the most intense doubts. It's really important to us that our beliefs about reality and our experience of reality are coherent. And when they are, then we feel at peace that our worldview is actually true. Like when the map says that there are caves right around the corner, and then there actually are. And the same goes for the resurrection. Dr. Licona's intellectual historical work is a kind of treasure map, and it's making a claim about reality. The tomb is empty. Jesus rose from the dead. And you could just trust the map. Maybe you trust the map maker, but you could also test the map. You can go and check it out for yourself. Is the tomb empty? For me, that looked like asking Jesus to show me if he's really alive, and being open to experiencing a relationship with Jesus. And so listen, I still have doubts sometimes, because there will always be a gap between me and absolute certainty. But it's when my intellectual investigation of the resurrection and my experience of the resurrected Jesus have matched, that I felt the evidence for Christianity is good enough for me to take a leap and trust in Christ.